Well, hello everyone. Can anybody hear me?
I'm pretty sure we can, Kelby.
Hey, all right. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I can see Pat. Hi, Roy. Well, everyone, it's officially 7:02, which is a very fine time for us to start rocking if Gordon can give us the green light. What do you think, Gordon? Shall we dive in? Welcome everyone to Tuesday Night Jazz on Thursday in Roy's basement and my front room. We are very grateful to be doing this and to be connecting with you all. And we'd like to say a big thank you to Gordon, first and foremost, because he has been very gracious in enabling us to do this by handling all the technical stuff. Because as we joked about earlier, Roy and I actually talk by landline, and that's as up to date as we get. In fact, earlier when we were working on this, I just picked up the phone to call Roy and say, hey, Roy, are you ready? And we'll get on the internet. And that's the way we roll. Looks to me like Gordon's going to start up the first tune. This is where we say our welcome to Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. I'm your host, Kelvin McNair. We have a very special guest with you this evening, the one and only Roy Styffe, one of my personal favorite saxophone players anywhere of any time. He is going to be sharing some of the music that he most dearly loves, and I have the good fortune of sharing some of Roy's playing that I most dearly love. We're going to get things warmed up with a little bit of a blues that Roy has never heard, even though he's going to play on it at the end of this amazing trumpet solo, which is courtesy of Roy's stablemate, running mate, Miguelito Valdez. We hope this gets you in the mood for some jazz. This is West End Blues, recorded at Tuesday Night Jazz in the Church just a few short weeks ago. So I'll let you enjoy Miguelito's playing, and we'll be back to you in a moment. Keep your ears open for the next solo, which I believe is the great Roy Styffe.
Hi, Kelby, you're not unmuted. I'm trying
And
to
unmute
unmute
me.
you. There we go.
There it is. There it
Ah,
is.
all
So
right, there
you
we
can
go.
you can start over, Kelby. Say what you
Hi.
had to say.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. My name is Kelby McNair, and we are very, very glad to have you with us. That was just a little sample of what we get to hear tonight. That was a piece entitled West End Blues that featured the wonderful Miguelito Valdez on the first solo, the great Roy Styffe, our wonderful guest here this evening, on the second solo, and the wonderful Brent Jarvis on that third piano solo. Um, it is my great pleasure to get to hang out with Roy anytime I can on the bandstand or in any capacity, pancake breakfasts or whatever we get to do. So I'm very thrilled to get to come together tonight to get to ask Roy some questions and to get a chance for Roy to tell you a little bit about where his music comes from, where his loves in the music come from, and where he came from as a player. So, Roy, maybe we can start things off. That was your first time hearing that tune. That was a song that we recorded live at Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church just a few weeks ago, if you can believe, in the pre COVID-19 era back in those days. And how did you feel getting to hear yourself for that first moment on that tune?
It was surprising to. It's always really surprising to hear your own voice. Um, what I noticed was the contrast between the personalities, um, and I thought it was really jazz because everyone seemed to be improvising. And by improvising, I mean reaching for that state where you're exploring the music together. Um, I noticed, like, when you hear Miguel, it's incredible bebop, and he's just hearing these lines and incredible energy that he's got. And I wanted to contrast that um, almost immediately with a darker scenario, with going into, just trying to hear something very, very different from that. And I think that kind of worked. Um, And then it was great to hear, Brent Jarvis, the way he swings so hard and he's got so much creativity going on. And I noticed the interplay between you, Kelby, and Brent as being really amazing. So that whenever I hear that interplay, I think jazz, and that's really what the music speaks to: the ability to converse, the ability to be logical and have compassion and have empathy musically. Um, and that's what we're all searching for, our own musical voice and that kind of elusive beauty that we know is there.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. And I think that's one very special thing that I've always noticed about your playing is that you have both a sound that exists and yet you're always searching. Your sound is always changing on tenor, on alto, on soprano. You're always I can always tell that it's you when I hear recordings and I hear you coming through. But like you just said, you brought in a darker hue to contrast Miguelito. That was like an intellectual decision. And then your emotion uh, filled in. That was such a beautiful solo and so much happened there. So many things happened. I agree. There was the movement that happened across the rhythm section underneath you supporting, I felt was we were all really connected to the stories that were happening.
Mm.
That raises an interesting point with the first tune that you selected. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about, if I'm not mistaken, it's the Lee Konitz Warren Marsh recording, we hope, of a tune called Wow. And what was it that first struck you about this piece? What was it that made you fall in love with this piece? What does it speak to you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about my main my main player as a alto sax player has always been Lee Konitz. I got to study with him for 2 summers in Banff in 1980 and 81. I was really young, and he was quite an influence. And what I liked about his approach was that he was such a kind of a rugged individualist. He always seemed to stick to his own artistic ideals, uh, through a lot of pressures. I'm sure it was really difficult overall. And he's still alive. He's playing in his 90s, but to go the gamut from, well, this recording is very important because it's Lenny Tristano. So that was the school he was a part of. So he was learning the music from Lenny. It's very cerebral, very thought out, very methodical music. But also on that recording in 1949 is the first recorded example of free improvisation. So that sort of speaks volumes about what's going on in that little school of those players. We've got Warren Marsh and Lee Konitz and Lenny Tristano exploring music in a way that hadn't happened before. They took classical music as an example. They were listening to Bird, but they were also playing free jazz way before anyone had even thought about doing that. So it's quite miraculous to have an example of that. Regardless of how successful or what you may think of it, it's a milestone recording. And that's why I wanted to touch on that.
Neat. Now, before we start on that, can you tell us a little bit about what that means when we're listening to, when we transition from whatever we were in before into free jazz? Can you tell us what we might hear when that happens?
Yeah, it's interesting on that recording because I've read articles about it, and the way they were approaching it, was the way we all do, playing jazz standards and playing on forms. But the idea was to use the germs, like the ideas that were happening musically, and to just listen to each other and to play regardless of key signature, regardless of time signature, and to relate to each other on a purely musical level, as if it's just like a conversation like this. So, yeah, it starts from that very, a lot of the tunes on there are quite influenced by bebop, but they were exploring this stuff on the bandstand as well.
Okay, beautiful. Well, let's have a listen to this. This is Lee Konitz with Warren Marsh and Lenny Tristano on a piece entitled Wow.
Wow. Oh, hey, Kelvin. So, yeah, that was beautiful. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Yeah. Hey, Gord, I can't hear Kelby. Still muted.
Okay, how's that?
Oh, there you are.
All right. I'm not sure why that's happening. Maybe Gordon, if you're aware, there seems to be something that happens sometimes where I get muted, and then it takes a few iterations of unmuting before I come back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church. My guest, the wonderful Roy Styffe. We just got to hear a beautiful piece entitled Wow. And wow, that was some
Yeah.
pretty amazing playing from Lee Konitz and Warren Marsh. Can you tell me a little bit about where that sound comes from? To my ears, those are the only two people who really sound or play like that. How did that music, it's almost like it's from another planet. Where did it come from?
Yeah, it's totally from the mind of Lenny Tristano. Um, and his concept was developed a lot from classical music. So you can hear the influence of Bach. There's a lot of Bach in there. But it's strange because it's mixed with Charlie Parker, and it's mixed with Bartok as well. So you hear these strange influences that come out very classical, but also entirely unique. It's extraordinary music. And what I was noticing there was just, in particular, Warren Marsh's ability to improvise. It never sounds like he's just resting. His mind is just so free. Like he's always really creating something. He's not just relying on, his stock Charlie Parker riff. It's more like, well, it's coming from the melody, and he's extrapolating on that, and he's building, and creating energy from his own creative mind. So very much like Bach to me.
Yeah, beautiful. I love what you're saying about how his creative process works. I was struck by that too. There's like an electricity in his sound, in his creations, and there's tons of rhythmic vocabulary I'd like to ask you about. But before we get there, I'd like to say, when you refer to it as very intellectual, it also doesn't seem at all cold or dry or lacking in emotion. Can you talk a little bit about how that works for you, how you conceive of both intellect and emotion coming together?
Well, exactly. And I know that Lee Konitz was accused of being cold and intellectual at the time. It was called, cool school. They kind of mislabeled it that and called it, just very cerebral or thought out music. It seems like, they had to go down that avenue where they were dealing with the musical structures. I mean, we all deal with standard jazz tunes. We have to learn the forms. We have to learn the rhythms and the harmonies. And I think in that sense, it's very honest music. So they were dealing, maybe they weren't completely formed yet, but they were learning those structures. And then to me, it is emotional because I get excited by listening to that particular one. And there are other ones that are connect very emotionally too. Like you say, it's you can also hear in their sounds, because it's a saxophone, it's quite, there's a bit of the crying sound to it, the wailing of the saxophone. So I hear that. So I don't really hear a lack of emotion, but some people do. So for whatever reasons, I think like they also say beauty is in the eye of the beholder too. So you have to assume that what they're working on is constantly in transition. So they're learning the forms, they're learning how to both, play on the forms, but also access their emotions. So that's hard to put into words, but that's how I would sort of go into that again.
Yeah, that's what I heard a lot, and I was struck by how much passion and how much beauty there was coming from that recording. I've always loved that band and those recordings, and I thought maybe you could speak just a moment before we move on. So when you say it's from the Tristano school, for people who aren't familiar with Lenny Tristano, can you talk a little bit about where he came from and how he was influential, and maybe who else he influenced other than just Lee Konitz and Warren Marsh?
Yes. So he was originally from Chicago. He was a blind pianist who is of Italian descent, I believe, Tristano, I believe. But he's just a brilliant man. Really worked with time structures, was one of the first people to explore overdubbing. So he did some stuff where he was playing in different time signatures at the same time. Uh, Improvisation was really quite a genius, I would think. Um, and I think Lee Konitz and Warren Marsh were probably the most famous people that came out of his school. But he became something of a guru, of a teacher of many jazz musicians. They would, when Tristano was living in New York, everyone would fall by his apartment and show up and just explore and work on the ideas that he was coming up with. And including Jerry Mulligan, including Miles Davis, um, what's his name, Gil Evans. So all these people were in that school, although we don't really think of it so much these days, but you know, even Miles was influenced by Lenny Tristano, but not directly. So because of Miles's influence by Gil Evans, you could say that it came to him indirectly. And even Charlie Parker played with Lenny Tristano. So it was definitely a huge part of the scene. Um, but not a lot of people are taking up his music, I think, in the way that they should. For me, it still strikes me as being a vast goldmine of information and style. And, you know, if I could take some of that music, I think I need a few more lifetimes, because if I could take some of that music and just translate that to my horn and just, you know, really work with that, that would really make me happy. But those guys really, to me, they were on a very, very high level, and in fact, a pinnacle of a sort, and extraordinary, extraordinary playing.
Wow, beautiful, Roy. Thank you so much. That's wonderful to get to hear that and to get to hear a little bit of the background too, because ultra modern playing. From what year did you say that was from?
Well, that particular recording was later. I believe that was from Europe in the 70s. I heard that was Niels Henning Orsted Pedersen on bass. And I know that recording. So that's a much later version of that song, which is interesting because when they did it in 1949 originally, it was in a studio, very controlled, and it was much more pure and sounded much more classical. But that one there sounded very much like, oh man, they were playing more freely. Um, and it was beautiful to hear just how they had developed over, I guess that would be 50, 60, 70, you know, 20, 25 years later.
Wow.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Okay, well, thank you, Roy. Let's check out the next tune you brought in. This is one that, of course, comes from maybe the most famous, iconic jazz saxophonist, at least in the alto saxophone category. This comes from the wonderful Charlie Parker. And what song did you want us to play for this one?
Um,
This was Billy's Bounce, was it?
Billy's Bounce, if you've got it. Or,
Absolutely.
yeah, anything of Bird is just wonderful.
You want to tell us a little bit about what we should listen for in this tune?
Yeah, well, the reason this one stuck out in my mind is because I remembered the situations around getting this recorded. I used to live in White Rock, and it would take me over an hour and a half to get down to Vancouver to buy vinyl jazz albums. And my friend had this book, and it was the 101 Best Jazz Albums. And one of them happened to be Bird Savoy, the Master Takes. And so I picked it up not knowing what it was or who Bird was. And I put it on, and I was just like, oh, I don't know. I mean, it's such crazy music. You know, it's described as, you know, atonal or very strange. And I knew there was something there, something intriguing, something that was drawing me in, but I couldn't, you know, put my finger on it. I couldn't figure out what was drawing me to this music. But it's really the first the reason I chose this is because it's the first recording I heard of Charlie Parker when I was about 16 or 15. And it kind of, changed things for me. And I think it changed things for a lot of people.
All right, right on. Well, everybody, this is Billy's Bounce by Charlie Parker. Wow, all right. Billy's Bounce by the great Charlie Parker. Beautiful, definitely a bouncing tune, feeling really good, and so much beauty and soul. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what you heard in that, Roy?
It's interesting because we get to hear Miles Davis on that. And he's probably, I don't know, he might be in his early 20s or
Yeah,
he's like, yeah,
19.
yeah. He's like really super young there, but you can hear there's a phrase he plays and it's just pure Miles. It's like, not, it was just like him, like
Yeah.
pure Miles. And I love that, you can hear that he's still like, yeah, it's just great. And birds sound so free on that. It's almost like rhythmically what he's doing. I mean, there's the people have tried to write down exactly what he was playing. I think it's actually impossible to write it down because there's so many nuances. It's so free that it doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense. It's not strictly, it's just impossible to notate
Yeah,
that.
it doesn't fit on the XY coordinates of the grid. It's something that moves. It's It's something linear,
Exactly.
something.
Yeah, I mean, just the shaping of the phrases, like over the bar lines, um, and he's not restrained by thinking, oh, these are eighth notes, these are 16th notes, these are quarter note triplets.
Hmm.
It's beyond. It's totally from outer space. Just the rhythms are just
Yeah.
yeah. I yeah.
Outer space or maybe inner space, some kind of connection there that makes it so, it you feel it so strongly through his sound and his time feel, and yet it's so hard to put into words. It's kind of interesting because Bird is, maybe you could say, like the most influential sax player of all time on modern jazz, and then yet no one ever really sounds like Bird particularly.
Yeah, I mean, some people have tried, that's for sure. But like you say, the inner space, I think Bird had something, he was kind of a bit of a Buddha on the saxophone. Just he seems to have found his own personal way to express music that, to me, it's timeless. It steps beyond any sort of fashion or commercial endeavors. It's pure art.
Very cool. And man, what a segue. Okay, our next special uh, bit of music here comes from Art Pepper. Now, this is a recording that was I was very glad to see you selected this because it was one of the first vinyl LPs that I got and that I first fell in love with. This is from Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm Section. And let's see. So what piece did you select? Was it You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To?
Yeah, that's a tune I've always loved, and just his warm way of playing, and this particular rhythm section, which was Miles Davis's rhythm section from the 50s. And I think they were stranded out in LA, and they probably needed some work, and Art Pepper, they managed to connect the two. And it's just a beautiful recording. I think this might be the one that Art Pepper actually didn't know about until like the morning of. And I think his wife at the time, she set it up for him, and he didn't even know where his alto was. He went and found it in the closet, and he put on the mouthpiece, and it ripped off the cork, and he was freaking out because nothing was working, but he managed to tape it up and get to the date, and he ended up playing just the most beautiful, spontaneous music. And it's just incredible to me that he was able to do that. And there's some kind of spirit to Art Pepper that's just, it's very, it's really wonderful to see and to be a witness of.
Right on. Okay, this is You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To from Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm Section. All right. You'd be so nice to come home to from the great Art Pepper from the classic album Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm Section. Swinging.
Hey, Kilby,
Yeah.
I've never asked you, but man, is Philly Jones like maybe your main influence? So I mean, I hear a lot of, ideas coming like musically similarity possibly there with you, but I'm just wondering what you think of the way he approaches the drums, and I hear it like as being really melodic.
Yeah, Philly Joe Jones, like you said about someone like Charlie Parker or Lee Konitz, Warren Marsh, they have developed their own language
Yeah.
that has changed everything that happened since. And when we try to use their language, we're only kind of creating like a representation of it. It's almost like you make a model of a cake. It's
Right.
not really a cake. Looks like a cake, but it's not a cake. It's
Yeah.
missing all the good stuff in the middle. So, yes, Philly is one of my biggest influences. And I think the thing that for me blows me away about Philly is probably three things. One, it always dances.
Yeah.
Philly talked about there being a relationship between the two hands in jazz. So you've got your ride cymbal, and your ride cymbal should get to dance on the bass player. So in this case, that was the bass player of Paul Chambers, and Paul already has a bounce that could make you want to dance for days.
Not a
But
bad
so,
partner.
yeah, Philly just dances on top of that. And then he has the most sassy cat things that he does with his snare drum. So he creates this energy and this attitude.
Mm.
You know, it's like you open a can and into the air flows vibe and attitude,
Yeah.
you know? And it's just got a vibe, a feel to it, an energy that's just sassy. And then his soloing is totally, to me, although, everybody kind of tries to do what he did, in my opinion, um, he took something that a classical snare drummer or a rudimental snare drummer, Charles Wilcoxon, developed in terms of the way the hands and the bounces work together.
Mm.
And he put that onto the drum set. So what you heard him play there was melodic sentences,
Right.
melodic structures that exist for him in his mind on an intellectual level, but also on an emotional level. So I think that's what you were talking about before. There's this beautiful marriage of uh, the intellect and the technical capacity to play that. Yeah,
Incredible.
I think so.
Mm.
So I wanted to ask you, so where does Art Pepper come from? He's one of the most beautiful alto players, but I don't know that many records of him other than this one. Where does he come from career-wise? How did, so like you said, if Miles, though that the rhythm section was hanging out in LA, they were stranded maybe.
Yeah.
They came to Contemporary Records, which by the way, that's one of the albums that we have been trying to model the microphone techniques that we've been using at Tuesday Night Jazz at the church on this particular engineer. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't this the one, Ray Dunan?
Yeah.
We're talking about
Roy Dunan, I believe.
Roy
Yeah.
Dunan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was that same. We took the images from the back of this record jacket and tried to duplicate those mic placements as a place to start for that last recording that we did with the quintet with you.
Yeah.
So a beautiful sound. But tell me a little bit about Art Pepper. How did Art, in your mind, come to be? And tell me about the coupling. It's almost like, was he always a West Coast kind of based player? There's a flavor there that's very beautiful in particular.
Yeah. I got really lucky. I got to hear him a couple times in Vancouver and in Western Washington. He came to Bellingham and did some playing down there. So it was great. I got to hear him, I guess it'd be the 80s. And he had to make a comeback because he started off in the big bands and with Stan Kenton. So he was doing that beautiful work and he was really highly regarded. And unfortunately, he fell into that kind of dark side of life a little bit. Um, I think, you know, you know, I guess he fell into some drugs and some hard times. So he ended up doing some prison time, which is the big story of his life, is that he lost basically 10 years of his life.
Mm.
Um, he went and did hard time for, you know, basically what started off as marijuana. I mean, yeah. And it, you know, kind of turned him into a bit of a harder person, a bit of a so-called criminal because of this, which of course he wasn't. He was a sensitive artist. So my feeling is that it's the wrong thing to do to take people and, you know, to incarcerate them for an infraction of that sort. It, you know, just doesn't make any sense. But even in prison, he was still playing music and was still playing saxophone. And then he got out, and it was the 70s, and he made a comeback and managed to, you know, tour the world. He went over to Japan and did some recordings and played a lot. He played with Elvin Jones. Um, he did some dates with. He played with Lee Konitz. He played with different alto players. Really liked to play with this West Coast pianist called George Cable's a beautiful player. But he had a great creative voice, and yeah, he was always what they would call West Coast jazz, but he was pretty hard edged too. I think he went through this period where he also met John Coltrane, and they hung out and did some practicing together. And he asked Train about, you know, how do I get to this freer place? And so he started playing more deeply from his feelings, from an angry place, unfortunately. And that's, you know, just the result of, you know, how he saw life. And so sometimes he ended up, you know, expressing himself in more violent terms. Um, and, you know, that's how he progressed, but he always had this great beauty and this romanticism as well. So I really like his style.
Cool. Now, what I've got next in our playlist is something that, again, it's like we planned this, Roy, but you talk about beauty and romance and nuance in your playing. And I want to play. There was a lot of examples when I was going through um, some things that I'd recorded. Now, typically, for the folks out there in the audience, you may see us with microphones, and we like to often musicians will like to record what they create on stage. But a lot of musicians are similar to me in that we record it and then we never actually listen to it, or we never do anything with it because we're on to the next thing, or we think, oh yeah, but wait till next week when we do this. And so in preparation for this, it was really neat to go through some of what we've recorded recently and actually have a listen to it. So the next piece I'd like to share is one that you haven't heard, Roy, but it was a tune that we just recorded a couple weeks ago at Tuesday Night Jazz at the church. And this one is called Opening, or Love Theme. And so this was probably Roy's, I don't think we ever played it before.
Maybe second.
Yeah, so maybe you'll get a chance to hear it. I'd be interested just in those qualities that you mentioned about bringing, you know, being able to bring in your life into your horn, but also the kind of artistic imperative to bring your life into your horn. So I hope the audience gets a chance to check this out. Especially, I think it's beautiful in a placement between Art Pepper and going into Coltrane. So we'll see what you think of Opening, Love Theme. Hello.
Somebody on the YouTube channel has asked if there was a gong last week at the church when you recorded that. And I think the question is wanting to know something about that special symbol that you had that was creating that sound throughout that last tune. Do you want to say something
Sure.
about that?
Man, you never have to ask me twice to talk about symbols. Um, there is a symbol that's called a China symbol. And I'm not sure if that's not what they would probably call it in China. The symbols are, I'll see if I can get it during the next tune, but they're a totally unique symbol. So symbols developed in Turkey, and in a totally other stream of physics and alloy and concept, symbols also developed in China, maybe even earlier. And the symbols that I'm talking about are the ones that you might see in the lion dances or the dragon dancing that happens, the lion dancing for Chinese New Year, where they'll wear costumes, and kung fu clubs will play these small crash cymbals. And they have a lip on the cymbals, and instead of most of the cymbals you'll see like on drum sets have a bell and then they go down. Hang on 1 second.
Roy, if you could just sing while he's gone.
They say you are never more than what is it, 6 inches away from a spider. Well, in my house you're never more than 6 inches away from a cymbal. So most cymbals, as you can see, go down, have a space up here we call the bell, and then they go down to the edge, and they have a sound kind of like that. Now a China cymbal has a totally different bell, a bell that you can hang on to. It has like a little lip on it, and then when it goes down, instead of going out like this, it goes up at the edge, almost like if you were to design an umbrella to catch rainwater, you would want a lip like that around the end of it. And so it does sound very gong-like. It's also called a trash can, affectionately, in the drumming world. They'll say trash can, and they want that really trashy sound. Those cymbals were maybe made famous by the great Mel Lewis. Also Barry Elms in Canada was the first drummer that I knew who played 2 ride cymbals in a China. One of my big personal influences is a wonderful drummer named Jeff Hamilton, who always plays with a China. You can't miss you can't miss his China. He uses it in a beautiful way. So I'm glad the listeners checked that out and noticed it is a very gong-like sound. Technically, it's called a China cymbal. Now, this is not supposed to be just about cymbals. I apologize. We're going to move on. So, Roy, tell me, how did you feel hearing that tune that you and I we played? That was the first time, and you just heard it. But you know, you were speaking about emotion and subtlety and nuance, and your sound on that recording just blows me away. There's just so much history and story in there, just in your playing.
Well, thank you, Kelby. You know, I've been playing more tenor lately, and it's something I've listened to tenor my whole life, and it feels so natural to play that voice, and to once I get close to that instrument, it's such a joy to play, because alto sits higher sonically, and it's a little bit, to me, it's a little bit more difficult to play the sound in a relaxed manner. It's almost like you have to be more engaged all the time, like more forceful and aggressive to play alto. But on the tenor, the sound it really floats out quite nicely. And well, at least the way I play it is pretty laid back, that's for sure.
Cool. Now, I was thinking, to my mind, the first time I started seeing you bring out the tenor was around the same time you started running. And being not a saxophone player, I surmised that, oh, of course, Roy's getting into running, his lung capacity is increasing, he's playing a bigger horn. Is there any truth to that, or is that just pure coincidence?
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I remember feeling a little bit more out of shape at one point. And I would play with you on gigs and I would get to the end of the gig and I'd really, I'd be so emotional, so into it. But I would find that physically I wasn't really able to sustain the energy like I wanted over the whole gig. So when I started running, I definitely noticed that my cardio energy and the levels changed as a player, and it became much easier to function and to play a gig of 2 or 3 hours and to have no physical holdbacks, not to be held back by the instrument itself. It's quite as all of our instruments are physically demanding. I'm sure drums are. I mean, it's just you're constantly going. But even saxophone, you can imagine it's like really projecting your voice um, in a way almost like an opera singer for several hours. And that can be quite tiring unless if you really are engaged with that sort of an ability that works on your cardio system. So that really helped. And then I think that made playing tenor a little bit easier. And it did coincide. I started playing tenor and it felt more natural. And yeah, I'm enjoying it. I play soprano, alto, tenor now, and clarinet, and even a bit of flute. So I'm exploring those instruments, especially now that I got some time off. And yeah, it's a great thing to be able to. As a matter of fact, today I got out my tenor and I was just playing some of this music, which is Beethoven string quartets. And I was just going through it on the tenor and thinking, wow, that's really a great source of improvisation. Um, anything can be a source for improvisation. It doesn't have to be a jazz standard. It can be, I mean, look at this book. I'll show it to you. I don't know if you can see it, but it's massive, and it's all of his string quartets, and that should keep me going for a while, I would think.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah, Bach's got such gorgeous melodic lines.
absolutely. Bach and Beethoven, and I particularly like Messiaen, um, Bartok. There's such great music there. It's really kind of beyond category. I mean, someone that writes that much music, basically to me, must have been an improviser
Yeah.
because they would sit down every day and just write out stuff and just improvise music, right? So they were on the same wavelength as all these the truly great musicians, Charlie Parker and Lee Konitz, Warren Marsh. They were all hearing these celestial sounds and inner sounds and beautiful sounds of music.
Wow. Well, beautiful. Yet another great segue, Roy.
Yeah.
Talking about tenor, talking about interstellar kind of things and spiritual influences in the horn. That takes us into your next selection, which was John Coltrane.
Mm.
And I think the one that we queued up was Naima.
Mm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about where this tune comes from and what it means or felt for you?
Yeah, this is an incredible piece. It's it was written for his wife, um, and it's just a gorgeous. The interesting thing about John Coltrane for me is a lot of people have taken his abstractions and really gone to town with that. The alternate changes. In other words, the building of structures upon structures that Coltrane was famous for. But also he was extremely melodic and played often very bluesy and very down home to me. And there is that aspect of his playing. And I hear that in Naima. The interesting thing about this is when I first played it, it was done as a double time, like a bossa feel. So, and a pedal point. So it can be approached different ways. It's the first time I really knew what pedal point was, what that idea is. And basically what you've got is the chords are moving over top, but the underlying root motion, the root of the bass, stays the same. So you've got a kind of floating quality, which was explored a lot by later composers like Kenny Wheeler, who came along and did a lot of stuff with pedals and free music over top of, like hearing structures over top of basic ingredients. So I think this tune, in a way, kind of paved the way for freeing up things in that it was that pedal point idea and loosening of rhythms, loosening of harmonies, and it led to a lot of experimentation down the road.
Roy,
Beautiful. Okay,
Roy, it's Gordon here, and just before we go ahead, I want you to know that I've got two versions of this. So, do you want to put a live version up where we actually get to see Coltrane playing, or would you like to have the little more finessed studio recording version of it?
I think if you don't mind, can we hear the studio one? I
Okay.
mean, I really appreciate, I think the live one I have heard. Maybe just to, I know there's this studio, the reason I say that is there's a live recording where they're all like outside and there's steam coming off of Elvin, and it's really strange looking recording, and it's slightly more out of tune. I think the recording wasn't maybe as bang on as I would like to hear it. If it's that one, then I wouldn't want to hear that.
Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, coming right up is Naima by John Coltrane. A beautiful, beautiful ballad. And as Roy said, check out these pedal points and check out the simplicity of the melodic line and just how he creates this whole picture with the simple, genius ingredients. Naima. Maybe the most unique, beautiful, unexpected, and pleasing coda in jazz. That's a beautiful ending, hey?
It is beautiful, and I was also struck by McCoy's playing on that. You know,
Yeah,
it was just it's so incredibly melodic. You know, and it's really something to I don't know, for me to realize is that you know, jazz doesn't have to be always always just searching for the craziest notes, but you can also come back home sometimes, you know?
yeah, absolutely. Hmm, beautiful. And could you talk a little bit about, so to me, there's such like tenderness in Coltrane's sound there, such beauty, almost, it's not that it's sentimental, but there's like a yearning almost, this beauty in the sound and written for his wife. But could you talk a little bit about what you hear in Train's sound?
Yeah, it was that same thing where you hear a sound and you know there's something very deep there, something profound and spiritual. So and that really, if you study Coltrane or if you know about his music, you know that there's that spiritual element, a thread uh, through his life, and um, I think that's what we hear in these musicians. I know Sonny Rollins is the same thing where, you know, he did yoga his whole life and went to India and, you know, sought out greater meanings and truths. Um, and I got to study with Liebman for a while, and he was part of his advice was, well, everybody, you know, you should be reading these books by, you know, these great mystics from India and different spiritual texts. So that was kind of wow, you know, here I am being taught about the saxophone, but really what he's talking about is, you know, reaching deeper into the soul, um, finding out what it is to be um, completely human, you know, what it is to be alive and to be um, you know, who we want to be. Who do you want to be? Who am I? You know, what is this all about? And I think that the questioning is really important. Um, and the questioning can lead to beautiful music. Um, uh, you know, this is what we do, Kelby. I mean, this is all we do is what we do well is to play music. I'm really not very good at anything much else. I can run a bit, but I'm an amateur at that. I can do yoga terribly. I practice meditation. I'm not that good at that. You know, I'm really not special in any way. But I think I can connect to other people in the manner that I'm able to um, realize the spiritual essence of all of humanity, and that brings out compassion and love. And if you've got some of that happening, I think you're on the right track, and that can influence the music in a positive way instead of just playing blistering notes and this is my ego here and this is my story. No, it's not my story. It's all of our stories, and we're just playing music and able to answer that question. You know, who am I and what can I do to help the situation?
Wow, beautiful, Roy. I think that kind of sums up life and music there. Thank you. You did that in a couple minutes. When we do, it's thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. All right. Now, Gordon, I don't know if we have a time cap that we have to be working with, but I know there's a couple more really beautiful examples that we'd love to get in.
So it's 8:27, and I think if we went to 9:45, we'd be doing just fine. And I think you've got enough time to do that, Kelby. Everybody seems to be really engaged in the conversation. And Roy, let me tell you, man, that was pretty special. All of the stuff that you just laid out there was really beautiful. Uh, thanks so much.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
thank you guys. And you know, it's kind of like when we're able to talk like this, it's kind of like music to me. It's almost like there's no difference between having this conversation when I'm actually playing my board. It kind of feels the same in a strange way, but you know, the words are basically sounds, and that we decide what the meaning of it is. But you know, the words are an expression of the feeling. So if you're actually truly saying words from the feeling, well, you're playing music. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on.
Kelby, take us to the next tune.
All right. Now let's see. So again, Roy's just, I don't know what it is, but there's this natural beauty in the transitions that are happening here. So talking about uh, beauty and the soul and compassion and the whole experience. Now take us to Ornette Coleman with Lonely Woman. Roy, can you tell us a little bit about how this tune came into your life and why exactly it needed to be in tonight's roster?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, Ornette Coleman is a very unique individual. He's a little, he's a little strange, a little odd, a little out there, but in a really cool way, I think. He played music in a way that was like Lee Konitz. He kind of had integrity. He had his own vision. He stuck to it. And I think that takes a lot of courage. So that's another quality that seems like all of these men and women now that are playing jazz exemplify is courage. The courage to get out there and stand on the stand and you know, put their heart on their sleeve and play this music. And it's often pretty underground, often pretty not exactly welcomed in our society. A lot of what, you know, society wants is for people to fall in line so much. But this music really speaks to responsibility in a different way, responsibility to our inner selves, to nourish that part of ourselves, which is the artist within. And I believe that we all have an artist within. So Ornette is truly an artist. And so this song, I did manage to play this song with a band, and it was with a friend over in Vancouver, and he got together a band that played Ornette Coleman's music, believe it or not. We had 2 bass players, 2 drummers, a couple of guitars, and I was there on saxophone. And it was pretty out there, but it was lots of fun. And that's how his music strikes me as being, you know, very vocal, very spiritual, but yeah, lots of fun. So Lonely Woman is maybe one of his most famous compositions. It's almost like a standard for him. But again, it's like very vocal, very almost like, what would you call it? Folk music.
Yeah, beautiful. Lonely Woman by Ornette Coleman. Ah, Lonely Woman by Ornette Coleman. Beautiful, Roy. Thank you so much for bringing that to us. I thought a lot about your words about bravery, a willingness to stand and share what it is without ego, but to say, this is what I feel, and to share that and to allow other people, other musicians to experience and share in that expression as well, and then share that freely with the world, uh, is a very beautiful thing from a spiritual and musical inspiration standpoint. Not as an ego, but to have that willingness and compassion to share that. It's beautiful.
It's really incredible, and you can feel the emotion when they're playing. It's just it's very sensual and just to me it's romantic and it's got a cry to it, of course, but it's really got the blues in a good way and just incredible. But I love the underlying Ed Blackwell there. And playing with, I believe it's Charlie Hayden. So you've got that really cooking energy underneath and this really floating landscape on top. So if you think about it, that really influenced a lot of players. That sort of Jack DeJohnette thing where they were doing this really intense vibe thing and guys were playing over top long forms and different structures were happening. And I think this recording and that type of playing really led to a new kind of freedom um, musically, and it's something that it's just wonderful to hear. Um, it reminds me of that some of Kenny Wheeler's playing, where you have that really cooking energy underneath, and then you've got the intensity of the very free horns on top. It's really neat energy.
Yeah, beautiful. And it ties in great with the next question of, so if that kind of freedom, that ability to conceive of the music differently in terms of its structure, to have these long forms, short forms, energies, less, what would you say, conventional ensemble forms, uh, the ability to invite freedom, the freedom that exists in our creativity into the music and allow that to be shared. That takes courage, like we talked about. It takes skill and intellect and rigor. It takes emotional willingness, to be honest, but it also takes a band that's willing to come with you on that journey. And I think with all these artists that we've heard tonight, they all have bands that exist. I mean, I suppose, except for Art Pipper Meets the Rhythm section, they were all groups that had some kind of an existing history, chemistry, and rapport. Uh, Even with a band like Art Pepper, or sometimes what we do at Tuesday Night Jazz at the church, where we just meet in that moment. There's this one of the most integral, in non-negotiable elements is respect, and the respect to hear equal uh, value ideas, for all ideas to be treated equally and to be allowed and given space to grow and be. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, before we hear this last example that you brought in, about some groups that help you to feel free, or instances where you feel free, or playing relationships that have inspired you, past and present, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, it's very interesting when you think about, over your lifetime, because you spend a lot of time, playing music. Now for me, it's like 40 years. And often, I read this great quote recently about Sonny Rollins. He's talking about the best solos he ever played, no one ever heard them. And it's so very true. Um, like, I know that a lot of times I can remember instances where I felt, okay, something, I felt like closer to it, whatever it is, like closer to self-expression. Um, and it might have been uh, me alone in a park in Toronto, working on a tune, shedding, no one heard it, but it was the best moment on that tune that I ever knew. Um, and then there were times when I was learning a tune with the person, and it'll be some odd little tune, and it might be 30 years ago, but that's still in me. And then we'll go to play it somewhere, and it's almost like that person or that situation still exists for me, out of time. It is somehow it's all interrelated, and it still exists in my mind, or it exists somewhere in reality, maybe out of time. So um, it's a very once you can touch into that space, so it's a spiritual space. You don't have to be really so um, fixed in time, fixed in place, fixed in ideals, fixed in thinking. You can be free in a lot of different ways. So it's possible for me to, like I had a few moments just picking up my saxophone today where it felt really incredibly good, because I haven't played for a week or so. I took some time off. So you kind of never know day to day what's going to happen. But in relationship to other people, you're right. If you happen to have that luck of reaching a person, and I feel this way about you, Calvi, is that, incredibly every time we play, it's like you get better, and the situation changes, and it's just like I feel very comfortable. But it's also great to switch it up, you know. Um, I have this group where I played with Bill Coon, and it was just wonderful too because it was so different. And these guys were thinking in a way that, you know, I hadn't really thought of before. So that was cool to put myself in that position. And I work with the Navy. I work in the Navy band. We play very classical and very structured music. That's very good for me in the fact that, you know, I get to actually be disciplined um, all the time. And without that, I might be a little bit, you know, I might go funny. I might be a little off my structures a little bit. Um, it's good for me to have discipline as a person because without that, I feel, you know, I wouldn't be able to have my one foot on the ground and one foot up in the air, or one, you know, like doing this kind of balancing act that I do, of feeling grounded, but also liberated and free at the same time. So that's really important to me, um, is to feel both aspects in my life, regardless of what I'm doing, whether it happens to be music or talking to you right now, or whether, you know, I happen to be running or meditation or, you know, conversing with my family. It's all the same. It's all the same stuff. So, but it's all music to me.
Roy,
Yeah.
it's Gordon here.
Hey,
I,
Gordon.
I want you to know that people online are really appreciating the conversation that you and Kelby are having, and the opportunity that they've had to get to know each other, to get to know you through the things that you've said. So it's been a really special time tonight. We're also aware that we're at 8:45, and I know that you and Kelby and I are going to stay to the bitter end. We're going to play all of the tunes. Not everybody's going to stay with us right until we're done. And I wanted you to hear, while they were still here with us, how much people are appreciating getting to know the two of you through this conversation. It's also important to say that we're going to continue to try and do Tuesday Night Jazz, and next week it will be on Tuesday. And I have put a link up if people feel that they have the ability to contribute something to the ongoing work that we're doing in the arts ministry at James Bay United Church, that their contribution through Canada Helps would be appreciated. And it doesn't need to be a lot of money, just something so that we can give the musicians like yourself who are sitting here and putting in the time. It would be super. The other thing, Kelby, that we need to talk about is that the SOCAN license is going to have to be paid for at some point in time because we're actually broadcasting uh, music, and so we've become a broadcaster here for this moment. And so
Wow.
we're gonna have to look into that and make sure that we do everything above board. So I want to thank our audience that has been with us tonight, both on YouTube and here in this chat room. And I'm going to let you know that we won't come back to make any public service announcements like this again. We're just going to let the music and the musicians play us out. So I know, Kelby, you've got a couple of more tunes and a little bit more conversation. But that's my uh, sales pitch for the night. Contribute as you're able. We'll keep the music going.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And Roy, tell me now, moving to the future, we've got your last selection for these, we could call them saxophonists you must hear, or people who are huge in the catalog or inspiration or mind of Roy Styffe. So our last artist we have is a wonderful saxophone player. This is a gentleman who maybe is good at doing what you were talking about having one foot on the ground and one foot in the air. And this is also a band that exists. This is a group that has a long history playing together. I'm speaking of um, Joshua Redman's quartet, and the piece that you've selected is a new piece to me. This is "I'll Go Mine." Can you talk a little bit about Joshua Redman and why him and why this music for us tonight?
Yeah. I bought this recording and fell in love with this song. It's thoroughly modern, uh, got some great players on it, but I really like the feel that the rhythm section generates. Um, and I really like his playing very much. I actually got to hear him in Seattle. I forget what month it was. It was fairly recently. And he played extraordinarily well. Um, his sound is gold. It's just from the tradition. His playing, his rhythms, ideas. It's quite astounding to me, and it's very humbling. Just to hear someone on that level, just the way they're playing. It's I suppose it would strike me the same way. It's kind of like hearing Coltrane live or something. I think he's one of those greats on that level, and you know, it's very humbling to hear that. So yeah, I had this recording going in my car, and I would keep listening and listening and listening over to it, listening over again and again. And it's one of those things where, if you're listening to a song maybe 40, 50 times, well, maybe there's something to it. So yeah, it's kind of got this weird kind of like California vibe to it, but I don't know. I kind of like it.
All right. Well, we look forward to hearing it. This is the Joshua Redman Quartet with I'll Go Mine.
Yeah.
Wow, beautiful, Roy. So great to get a chance to hear that.
Yeah, there's some great energy to that piece. It's just like so much fun, you know. But did you check out like the way Aaron Goldberg on piano, the way he was melodically, you know, the two of them were hearing things so incredibly together. It's I don't know how they do it, but rhythmically they were just picking up on some things that obviously they work a lot together. And I really admire his piano playing as well, and Aaron Goldberg. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful band, and they've got such chemistry and such trust and such willingness to make space for each other to transmit or transcend. It's a pretty beautiful thing to behold.
Oh, it's incredible. And the most beautiful moment when they did the concert down in Seattle was when he actually played an old standard. He played "My Old Flame."
Oh, beautiful.
Beautiful ballad, and he went on and just did some solo saxophone stuff, and it was just incredible.
Oh, wow, I love it. Well, I've been a fan of Joshua Redman. I actually got to interview him once.
Oh, sweet.
Here, about 20 years ago, when he was playing at whatever the club in the bottom of the Sticky Wicket would be.
Oh, yes.
And I was too young to get into the club at the time, but I got in because I said I was an interviewer for a magazine, which I had a relationship with the owner of the magazine. My brother was the owner of a hip hop magazine, and they had a music column. So I got to get in to go and see the show and interview him. And it was really neat to talk to him and to hear the music. And I hear what you're saying again, another beautiful marriage of intellect and inspiration, and a way to sort of express the human ability.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if I did see an interview with him, and he struck me as being very humble, which I was kind of surprised by. But is that what you got from the interview?
Totally. Yeah, he's super intellectual, super smart. but very much just focused on his goals and what's happening in the moment. Very much present.
Yeah, I mean, you'd see quite a bit of growth in his playing. I mean, to like you say, he must be very smart. I think he had a choice to either go into law. Is that right? He was going to be a lawyer.
That's right. He had a Harvard scholarship.
Right, and I think he had so much going on for him as a saxophone player that, including his name, of course.
Yeah, son of Dewey Redman.
He's Dewey Redman's son. Yeah, Dewey was a guy who played with Ornette Coleman, and Dewey had that same unique voice thing going on, and yeah, so he's from a great lineage.
Well, that takes us to the last tune, which was just renamed today or yesterday by my daughter.
Oh.
And ladies and gentlemen, while we move to that song, it's a piece that also Roy has not heard, but seemed to me to be a great tune to send us off with, to hear, you know, the music is somewhat modern, maybe in a similar way of looking forward as the Josh Redman Band, but I think Josh would be a big fan of your playing. All the saxophone players that you've played tonight would be big fans of your playing. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been such a pleasure to spend the evening hanging out with you and to be celebrating this wonderful music. And I'm going to say the song title in just a second. It's the big finish. Such a nice time to share with you, Roy. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas and all this beauty with us. It's been a lesson in life and music, and I'm so glad we got to share it. And the name of this song has been renamed High Above the World.
Oh, beautiful.
Yep. It's the best thing. You know that you got something right as a composer when your daughter sings your song. So he was singing it on the swing and came up with this song. So this is a long song. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll leave you with this song, and we hope we'll see you again next Tuesday night for another Tuesday Night Jazz at the church. Featuring Richard Moody. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to Roy Styffe and Gordon Miller. I'm Kelby McNair. Please enjoy High Above the World. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Be safe, and see you next Tuesday.
Thank you, Cal. Thank you, Heather.
I got a bed.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Tuesday Night Jazz at the Church on Thursday evening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Kelby. Thanks, Roy.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Mm.